my podcast, The Government Mechanic. I am your host, Dr. Lynn Sandra Khan, and I am the Government Mechanic. Today we are starting 4 episodes about farming, ranching, fishing, and the state of the American food supply. My very special guest is Brenda Cochran, who, with her husband, has been farming for nearly 50 years. Both in Maryland and in Pennsylvania. She and her husband raised 14 children and homeschooled them. So she is quite an extraordinary person with deep concerns about the state of farming in America. And part of that is why she started with several others, Farm Women United. Welcome, Brenda.
Hello, Lynn. I appreciate this opportunity.
Absolutely. So my first question is really a general one. What is dairy farming like in 2024?
Well, I guess that would depend upon which dairy farmer you're speaking to, but the type of farmer I will speak about is family farmers like we are. And the dairy farm now is a continuation of abuse by the government policies. We try to operate our dairy farms traditionally, typically smaller herds in a more sustainable manner, whether we are conventional or organic. And we're just not making it for the same reason that this policy was enforced in April of 1981 to continue to devalue the work and the products that we raise by controlling how the milk is priced. And so this is to live as a dairy farmer today is to continue to be disenfranchised. We have no representation. We have no voice. We are out of sight, and we quietly go out of business. It makes me very angry because by getting rid of farmers like us, our consumers are not being able to access fresh, local, full-fat, traditional milk and dairy products. Virtually all the products that they are seeing in the dairy case are highly industrialized products coming from very large units of milk production, traveling great distances and undergoing lots of technological applications that are beyond what is necessary if we had more local dairy farmers.
I think what you spoke to that people don't understand is that the government sets the price of milk, not the farmer. And when the government sets that price, they do it with a formula that does not include all of what it costs to produce that milk. It does not cover your cost of production. Is that right?
That is absolutely correct. And it is done deliberately. This is not ignorance or happenstance. This is policy execution to enforce an agenda that was brought to the public attention in the 70s. It's called the Flanagan Report. It was executed in secrecy under Richard Nixon by Peter Flanagan. My understanding is if it hadn't been for Senator Hubert Humphrey, we would not have known about it. And if you get a copy of it, it'll be very clear to you that the traditional small local family dairy farmer was targeted for extermination. And for dairy, how they're getting rid of us is by controlling the milk price below what it truly costs to produce the milk in a smaller, traditional, locally based culture, a rural culture.
And if the agenda, as you're saying, of the U.S. Department of Agriculture is to drive small businesses, small farms, small ranches, small fishing communities, it's to drive them out of business, dairy farming, they're doing a good job. There used to be, 660,000 dairy farms in the 70s, I think you were telling me, and now there's 18,000 dairy farms left. So literally, hundreds of thousands of our farms have been driven out of it.
That is absolutely correct. Yes, that's what happened. It was over 600,000 in the 70s by far. And as far as the number right now, I cannot.
I looked it up.
Yeah. So you can see that this is a depopulation. It's to get rid of private property controlled by small family farms. Where we go, the rural economy goes. So if you come out to the traditional farming community that milk cows, you will see that our local businesses, our small towns are also in a state of collapse. This is a serious matter. It's a socioeconomic program to remove local food producers from proximity to consumers, to put everything in transport, and ultimately it's to globalize and free trade food.
And the impact on small communities, rural communities, mountain communities, coastal communities has been devastating, because farming is a central part of the economy of small town America.
Well, what's happened to the family dairy farmer is consistent with what's happened to the ranchers and the family fishermen. It's a consistency, so you can see it's a government policy to remove traditional food production from the traditional producers, which are farmers, ranchers, and fishermen, and make it completely technologically oriented, controlled at great distances, out of sight. And the consumers have some degree of invincible ignorance. Most people aren't from farm background or from rural communities. They really mostly don't know what's happening, how brutal this is. More and more consumers are concerned about the quality of food, whether the food is nutritionally equivalent to what the type of food that local farmers would produce. And it's quite questionable whether it's worth the price that's put on this industrial food. You're not getting much bang for your buck.
As farmers have problems and go out of business, the big companies come in and the market is concentrated. So there are very few. I think there's like 4 or 5 major milk producers, 4 or 5 major pork producers, and they're not even American owned. We don't even know who owns the companies that are making decisions about the food that we eat. We do know what you're saying is that far too many farmers are being driven bankrupt, and it's having devastating consequences on the family and on the community.
Yes, and the different products that the farmers produce traditionally, the government may have different ways of getting rid of those farmers. With us, it's through the milk price, because they control the milk price historically, and they refuse to factor our costs. But the common theme for most of the farmers, including dairy farmers, this has created monopoly and monopsony that it's just too much for us to deal with. And you can't move your milk. It used to be you could move your milk to an independent processor or a different co-op. Everyone who's got a milk market is basically captured and has to stay there. Many of the farmers are not speaking up because they're afraid of being thrown off the truck. There's intimidation. There's an absence of transparency on exactly what are the different farmers getting paid, even within a co-op. There's kind of a secrecy about whether some of the larger operators are getting the same milk price that smaller producers are. So clearly what I'm going to say point blank, this is a massive political scandal. It's gone on for decades. It needs to be investigated. It needs to be taken seriously. The problems are in Washington. It's typical of what any other problem tracks to Washington. There's dirty money, there's political influence, and the money that the consumers are paying for milk and dairy products, it's not coming back to sustain their farmers and ranchers and fishermen. Period.
Probably one of the most important things you're saying. All that money that's coming in is controlled by very few corporations, whose bottom line is profit. And when they sell their bottled milk or packaged dairy products to groceries or restaurants, the profit does not come back to the people who actually did the work, to the farmers. And the numbers tell the story. There's hundreds of thousands of farms have disappeared in this country, and the consequences are devastating. What are the most important changes you want to see at the U.S. Department of Agriculture? What are your priorities that they need to do?
Well, I'm sure there are people who are well-intentioned working at USDA. So this is not an indictment of everybody. But for what I'm getting from federal dairy policy, why do I need a USDA? There's no purpose for it, because its intent was to help farmers to do a better job and to make more money to sustain what they had to do to keep their farms. And we're as you've already stated, we're losing, just on talking about dairy farmers, we've lost hundreds of thousands of dairy farmers since the Flanagan Report became the law of the land. So if there's any purpose for USDA, I think USDA has to tell me what their purpose is. Because right now their purpose is to get rid of all of us who are the local food producers. Something going on right now will emphasize this. A dairy farmer has no standing at the USDA to request a hearing, to examine the federal milk marketing order functions. We don't have any standing, and those officials will tell you that to your face. You can't call for a hearing because you're a farmer. Only the industry, which includes the co-ops, can call for a hearing, which they did a year or so ago. And it's not to address my low milk price. It's to take more money from my milk check to give to the processors in a scheme that's called make allowances. Somehow the government scheme requires the dairy farmers to donate a significant amount of money from the front of our milk check that we'll never touch, because the processors demand that somehow myself on a dairy farm, I'm responsible for covering their production processing costs, even though I can't pay my own bills, my feed bills, my utility bills, my taxes. I can't afford groceries lately. I mean, I am outspoken. Most dairy farmers will not talk like this. Dairy farmers, like a lot of farmers, are very private people. I didn't come from a farm, so I don't have that burden. I'm outspoken because we have got to stop the policies that are destroying our farmers, ranchers, and fishermen. Virtually every consumer I've ever spoken to, when they hear this story, they're upset. They do not want to spend any more for milk and dairy products if it's not going back to the real farmers. They will pay more, a lot more, for their milk and dairy products if it's helping keep the farmers on the land. So the consumers can have relationships with us, can see that we take good care of our cattle, that we do care about the soil, we do care about the air, we care about the water. But in order to take care of the air and the water, the soil, and the animals, sadly, you need to get an appropriate income. You need to have value on the product you're producing, which is milk. And so the consumers are our allies. They're not against us. Our problem is with the government, the policies that have been enforced by anyone who's in Congress, anyone who's in the White House. It doesn't matter to date. So it's a uniparty on don't pay the dairy farmer, let them go out of business. So my private property is being confiscated. This is an unfriendly takeover. And honestly, if the mega milk crowd were doing a better job with the quality of milk, maybe I'd have no leg to stand on. But the longer the industry controls the price in the government, controls how we put butterfat in our milk and dairy products, and how we are paid. You pay me, I sustain infrastructure. They're not sustaining infrastructure. Any of these mega units will go out of business just like that, similar to what happened to the, was it 1.3 million chickens who were just executed because the integrator relationship with the processing plant went south when the processing plant went out of business. So the state had to step in and kill those birds in a very questionably, I think it's quite cruel how those birds were killed. I find it offensive. We had 17,000 dairy cows burn up in some sort of fluke industrial fire in Texas. You know, we've had hurricanes come in and take out hog and poultry buildings in the Carolinas, and no one seems to have a conscience about it. These are sentient creatures. These are animals that are our food animals and fiber animals. And this whole policy that the federal government has promoted is a push for utilitarianism that degrades us all and ruptures the close and intimate relationship a farmer must have with his animals, her soil, the products that they are producing for the consumers.
Beautifully
Dehumanizing.
said. Beautifully said. Beautifully said. So my last question is, what can consumers do? You know, we all eat, we all go shopping. What can we do to help farmers?
The main thing that consumers have to understand is that you can't take your food for granted. Mm-hmm. I know most of us are busy. I'm busy. I struggle with the grocery bills. Okay. We don't have time or means to produce all of our food either on the farm. but food cannot be taken for granted. And I think the more the consumers learn to read labels, to ask questions that matter to them, to find out what alternatives they have available pretty close to home, and then raise hell when they find out that they don't like what's in that food. They don't like the fact that they don't have fresh local food, and realize that they are now entering the politics of food. This is all politics. Unfortunately, you look at any election cycle and there's a lot of issues that are politicized. It's time to politicize food. If they care about what they eat, they will care about who produces that food. So what do? We're right in the shadow. Dairy farmers have two double barrel shotgun coming at us right now. One is the FMMO hearing will be revealed supposedly today. The final rule and the recommendations supposedly is coming out November 12th, the day of this taping. We don't look for it to be friendly towards dairy farmers. It's going to be more enriching the industry with money that belongs to the dairy farmer. Okay. The second thing is the farm bill. You've got people clamoring for a lame duck farm bill. The worst thing that can happen to consumer rights in food is if you pass a lame duck farm bill. In spite of what all the people saying, oh, we need a farm bill, we need a farm bill. We don't need a farm bill along the lines of what we've been getting for decades. All the 5-year farm bills do is make everything that's horrible worse. The farm bill should be stopped and brought into the light and transparency of the consuming public and taxpayers, because there's a lot of taxpayer money in this. It's not going to benefit retention of the existing local farms or a revitalization of rural America to bring new blood onto the farms and start doing it right. We're not doing it right. We're not doing it right for the farmers, the workers. We're not doing it right for the towns. We're not doing it right for infrastructure, entrepreneurship, creativity. We've snuffed the creativity that gave us John Deere plows, McCormick, all the things. Nobody is working the land to think how to solve problems. So the biggest threat to the U.S. food supply right now would be an expedited lame duck farm bill.
And what's relevant is the point that you raised before, which is individual farmers have no agency. You are not at the table. It's an invisible, secret process to you, how the government prices your milk.
Correct.
And you're not at the table. You're not at the table.
And I want to share a story close to home. I have no problem being engaged with the politics. And I've been doing it for a long time, but it's gone from having a kind of a friendly relationship with elected officials and their staff and now being treated like crap. That's why I say we're disenfranchised. My most recent encounter was to have a very serious question about my inability to make a payment on what we call the DMC premium, which we won't go into that right now. Fact is, why can't I pay it? Why can't I pay my utilities? Why can't I pay my taxes? Why can't I pay my suppliers and creditors, my mortgage? Because the feds are deliberately undervaluing my milk to put me out of business. They don't care if I went out of business in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. They don't care if I go out of business in 5 years. I got to go out of business. Because this way they will control the means of production in the food sector. So I called my congressman's office and I was immediately told that I would have to call the Ag Committee. Okay, so why am I calling the Ag Committee when I might vote for this congressperson? Why am I shunted to an Ag Committee? My response is I didn't vote for the Ag Committee. But that's the dynamic. They will do anything to shuffle the citizen from a direct relationship with a senator or congressperson and send me to the bureaucracy. I'm sorry, but right now, a committee is a bureaucracy. The USDA is a bureaucracy. FDA is a bureaucracy. They are not working for the people. And there's a huge investment of taxpayer money into sustaining this sort of bureaucratic infrastructure with no benefit to the people who are farming, ranching, fishing, and eating.
And we wonder why people are so angry and why there's so much division and so much anger in this country. And I think you've hit the nail on the head. The government policy does not serve the people of this country.
Well, there's two groups, Lynn. There's two groups that are being victimized. It's the farmers, ranchers, fishermen. We produce the food, the raw food. Then there's all these people in between. They have special interests. And then the other victim group is the consumers. Because when you're rushing home from work and you got to pick up the kids, you don't have time to be sitting there reading labels. You grab what's on the shelf.
Yep.
And that's why people like myself, I've had it, because we're being taken advantage of by the political system, and so are the consumers. And we're consumers also. And honestly, I am very reserved in giving any recommendation for consuming the type of milk that's being peddled, including extended shelf life where it's sterilized, and low fat, no fat.
I'm so sorry. I'm just sorry that you have been put in this position, and so many other farmers, ranchers, fishers have been put in this position too. And it's shameful. It's shameful. What the government is doing to the people that produce our food is shameful. I want to thank you. I want to thank you.
I want to share one last anecdote about what's
Okay.
coming out today, the 12th. When the USDA issues the final rule and the recommendations, unless they dramatically change what we've already seen, this is going to be another execution of dairy farmers. Yet we can't call a hearing. They don't engage our testimony, but we are obligated to vote those recommendations up or down. If we vote them down, we lose the entire federal order system, which does give us a modicum of protections. So if we find the recommendation offensive, which we do, and vote it down, we have completely lost any protections on some of the other issues that that order does protect. Now, if we vote it up and we are approving what is going to take more money out of our milk check with no remedy on the formula. And typically the co-ops, who are not friendly to the farmers, are going to block vote us. They're going to block vote us based upon numbers or volume of milk, and we will still have no say. We're still disenfranchised.
Thank you, Brenda. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing what's going on in the lives of so many farmers in this country. And I'm so sorry about the pain that the people who produce our food, who do the work to produce our food, our farmers, our ranchers, our fishers, are not at the table when our government makes policy about food production, our food system, and about family farming. And there are horrible consequences. And I hope these podcasts help bring more awareness about what these issues are. Thank you again, Brenda. And to our listeners, come back for episode 6, where we'll start talking about farming and the food system across the country, and then ranching, and then fishing. Thank you so much.